Well, we are excited to kick off the day here with the Group Black programming and the Culture Unleashed stage. I am honored to be able to moderate this panel today. The focus of the conversation is embracing the multiracial consumer. My name is Kerel Cooper, President of Advertising at Group Black. And we'll start with Elizabeth. You want to introduce yourself?
Hi, mic check. My name is Elizabeth Campbell. I work for McDonald's Corporation. I have the opportunity to lead our field and local culture team, which is accountable for about $50 billion worth of sales within our marketplace.
Good morning, bienvenidos. I'm Mike Roca. I lead our Elevate cross-cultural practice at Omnicom Media Group, and super stoked to be here.
Awesome. Hey, everybody. I'm Charlene Polite Corley. I'm VP of Diverse Insights and Partnerships at Nielsen. And that means I'm responsible for our thought leadership about the power of the Black audience, as well as all historically excluded audiences for the future of not just your DEI strategy, but your growth strategy.
Awesome. Again, thank you all for joining us today. So again, conversation around embracing the multiracial consumer. Let's start with defining. What does that mean, the multiracial consumer, and why is it important for advertisers to acknowledge that demographic? Charlene, I'll start with you.
Yeah, I think about it in terms of, just how we define it, like from a census perspective. That's a huge growth market of people who are more than one thing, right? And so I think that the piece of our population that identifies as two or more races tripled between the last couple of census. Right. But for me, I also like to really talk about the multicultural piece. When I hear multiracial, I'm thinking about intersectionality, and I'm thinking about people who play in between some of those rigid paths from times before.
Gotcha. Okay. Mike?
I have to build on plus one on everything you just said. The multiracial, multicultural label has been good for a certain period of time, right? When you talk about multicultural marketing, multicultural audiences, but I think we are in a new era.
Absolutely.
Where over 40% of the population is diverse. If you look at the population growth, and you know all the numbers, right? 100% of the growth in the last 10 years have come from these segments. And if you look at certain categories, QSR, that's where the growth is, right? So when you think about the intersectionality, when we talk about multicultural or diverse segments or whatever term we want to call it,
right?
There's more depth to it, right? Absolutely. There's so many intersectionalities where you could be Latino and you could also be Afro-Latino and celebrate both cultures and both aspects. So I think there is more depth to it. I felt for a long time that multicultural, that term has been very limited in terms of what marketers could be doing in this space and exactly how they could communicate with these audiences and really extend themselves more within these communities versus just saying, let's just check the box, multicultural because it's a catch-all, right? I think that's been my biggest tension, is it's been this sandbox that has been a little too easy for marketers and for agencies, quite frankly, to say, we got our multicultural initiatives, let's move on.
I'm gonna come back to that point in a minute, but Elizabeth, I wanna hear your definition.
Yep. I love this conversation. So the way I look at it is that we are all multiracial. I do not know one person who is of a single race. And if I have met them, I have not identified themselves in that way. So throughout my entire career, I've had the opportunity to market, understand, communicate with people who are multiracial. The difference between today and the past is that people are now self-identifying. They are being very proud of it. They are asking for us to see them beyond just the color of their skin, but to go deeper to understanding who they are, because they know that they are the ones who are shaping culture. They know that they are the ones who are bringing the dollars to the table. And that's what the difference is that people are no longer hiding. And yes, the census has it so that you can check a box and self-identify, but it really is that people aren't even worried about that box. They are really just bringing forward who they are and how they want to express themselves. And so that's the way I look at it more from a multiracial perspective.
Gotcha. Okay, Mike, I want to come back to a point you were making. We may get a little deep here, right? So, I want to get your thoughts on how advertising has represented people of color, and where have those shortcomings been?
There are very few categories that go all the way deep. You know, I give credit to McDonald's for kind of paving the way in this industry, because they're, you know, if you look at QSR, auto, telco, I think those are the categories that are leading the charge. But there's so much more out there, right? And I think what has happened quite frequently, it's always been an afterthought, right? A bolt-on versus a built-in. And I think that's the mindset that needs to change.
Yeah.
Because if you look at the growth trajectory for these audiences, it's critical, right? If you want to future-proof your business, you really need to double click into what are the nuances of these communities, right? Like, and do that legwork, because there's a lot of insights that actually could help influence your overall strategy and go-to-market approach, and lead with multicultural insights at the forefront, but they halo across all audiences, right? Because I think specificity is beautiful. There's a beautiful thing in there where, you know, I think other cultures relate to certain things that they may not be of the culture, but there is some connective tissue. And they said, you know, I get that. Like, that actually happens in my family. So I think there's an opportunity for brands to actually look at these insights and these nuggets and nuances that come from these communities and see, like, how do we use that to kind of drive forward? And we've seen that with some campaigns. Within an Omnicom Media Group perspective, we have, you know, the PepsiCo portfolio, and we launched a campaign during the biggest moment of the year in Super Bowl with Doritos, where it was a Hispanic-driven initiative. The entire cast, Dinamita, was all Latino cast, and it was on the biggest stage in our marketplace. So that was, for me, like, wow, that was a moment of pride in terms of seeing that come to life. But we saw it last year too with the NFL and Diana Flores.
Oh my gosh.
And that spot, and how amazing that was. So I use that as best in class as well. Now, Liz, I know from the McDonald's portfolio, you've been doing it for years, where you'll rotate in Spanish language creative during the Oscars, right? So there's moments to kind of celebrate these audiences, not just in a silo, but on the center stage.
Yeah.
Can I jump in with some data points also?
Definitely.
Because to your direct question, our latest report that we just released on the Black audience, we asked, you know, how, 39% of our respondents said brands always represent Black folks the same way, compared to like 20-something for folks overall. So there's that sense of that even in the campaign messaging I'm getting, it's very like one note. And we take that further because I'm so glad you brought up the Afro-Latino segment. When we asked them how often they're feeling misrepresented across media, 81% of our Afro-Latino respondents said, you're frequently getting it wrong. And so for a community that spends the most time with media to say so frequently there's a misstep, there's so much more opportunity to go deeper. And so there's a couple of data points that we're using right now to talk to our clients about the opportunity to, again, get specific and really walk through that culture's shoes, and for the benefit of all of us, right? Because there are those similarities, but you also have to tell an authentic story. So.
And I think it's important for you to use the different ways of engagement, which you're also mentioning. Because what I've traditionally seen is that we will develop Hispanic content that goes into Hispanic media only. And what we've started to do is evolve and say, if we know that the majority of the consumers are reflective of people of color, African American, Asian, Hispanic, then that content should be good enough to go into what was previously known as a general market. And that's the way that we are evolving at McDonald's, is that as we are developing content, as we look at Spotlight Dorado or different programs, if it's that good and if it hits the consumer that well, it should go across all of our media and not just in targeted media for that specific Hispanic segment.
Yeah, and I think one of the themes that I see here in all of your responses is, you know, being able to authentically connect with the consumer, right? And there are many different ways to do that. Obviously, artificial intelligence, AI, is a trending topic in our space right now, even though it's been around for quite some time, right? Dave Steinberg, CEO of Zeta, he was on stage here yesterday, and one of the points that he made was that he sees a day where you can use artificial intelligence to really do sort of one-to-one creative advertising, right? Because all of us up here, we fall into the multiracial consumer bucket, right? But all of us should probably be spoken to a little bit differently from an advertiser perspective. So I want to get your thoughts on, you know, the use of technology, how do you sort of, how do we get to a point where, again, the messaging is specific to not an audience, a group of people, but the individual?
Yeah, I can jump in there. I actually wrote an op-ed about this last year when the strikes hit the entertainment industry, because I was worried about the concept that AI can just replace a writer's room, and so who are the folks in those writers' rooms who would be impacted by some of these quick transitions without a lot of intention behind it? And it's Black and brown people, or it's historically excluded people. So that is still my concern across generative AI in general, is like the stuff that we would normally have as a first step entry into a field or internship is getting AI'd out, if you will. But it's not going away. So how are we going to leverage it and use it? I think to your point of, if there is a world where we need like a lot of iterations of creative or messaging, I think it's a great partner for first drafts. But I don't know that we're at a place yet where the authenticity really comes through. The example that I use a lot, specifically as an African American woman, hey, write a scene about a Black mom and her daughter or whatever, and they're talking about Rosa Parks and she did this and you would never be sitting down and just having a conversation the way that AI spit it out. So I think there's still and that's just to say, it's going to get there, but you have to have the right actual people influencing how it gets there. Right. And that is the work that I hope that the industry continues to invest in. I don't know that we're at a place to fully trust that AI gets it right to speak to all those different nuanced experiences. Again, because the data that we're looking at, the African American experience, the Black first generation experience, those are two different messages sometimes. My mom doesn't have a WhatsApp, but my best friend's mom, who's Jamaican American, you better believe she's got one. You know what I'm saying? So there are nuances that I don't think are there yet, and for me, that's where really the magic is, where you still need creatives in the room. So. Gotcha.
Mike, you want to add to it?
I 100% agree. I think, we have to embrace technology, but AI will never replace culture, right? In terms of making sure that we have the right decision makers behind the scenes and at the table to make, decisions that are really going to influence the way that brands go to market. And I think with AI, if you look at just technology overall, right, there's been a historical, absence of representation of folks who are, making those decisions. So I think it's something that we definitely need to keep in mind as we start kind of creating strategies that are based off of AI and technology. But if you look at who's driving technology and the usage, it's these audiences, right? It's multiracial. If you look at 1864, there's about 4 million folks that identify as multiracial, but they consume the most media out of any segment in the US, over 13 hours a week, right? And if you look at, if you actually double click into it, 60% of multiracial, of that multiracial segment is under the age of 34. Right? So those should be the folks who are actually, influencing the way that AI is being designed. And that's kind of what my biggest fear is AI is sometimes scrubbing off of the biases that we're trying to actually overcome from a digital perspective.
So I want to stay on creative for a minute and the point about biases, right? So, and Elizabeth, I'll start with you on this particular question. How can advertisers ensure that their messages resonate with diverse audiences without falling into those stereotypes, those biases, so on and so forth?
Yeah, I would say, and we've talked about this for years in terms of making sure that you have the right people at the table to make the decision. But I want to start before it becomes with creative or advertisers. By the time typically you get the assignment from a creative perspective, it's already been vetted from a business perspective. What are we doing? What is the problem that we're trying to solve? And how are we going after that in order to drive business or drive engagement with our consumers? So how do we make sure that we strengthen the funnel there so that you can eliminate the biases, but the people who are actually making the business decisions can then help to influence the brief, the content, the creative that will be continue to move forward. But that's one of the ways that I think that we can strengthen it, because everybody right now is fighting for a seat at the table, the creative table. Let's fight for a seat before you get to that creative table so that you can actually drive the impact within the industry.
Okay, Mike, same question for you.
I love that, right? Because that's kind of where all the decisions are made. Before we even get the brief, there should be decisions being made in terms of where's growth coming from, right? Well, are we looking at Black African-American audiences, the Latinx population, Asian? I think once you get to the creative, especially once you get to media, sometimes the ship is already sailed
Yeah.
in terms of pushing back and kind of saying, you know what, let's go a different route, right? Because everyone already has been aligned in terms of where we're going. So it gets a little difficult in that space in terms of what you're trying to do. And then that's why we sometimes get to places where we're retrofitting campaigns and retrofitting media plans. And it becomes always that bolt on. But I think, you know, we're moving in a new direction, hopefully, you know, with, you know, categories and marketers like McDonald's that are just kind of leading the way. But I think my job has always been, there's so much that we're doing with the biggest marketers. I think there's 80% of the market that still needs to get it right? Because everyone's in a different part of their journey. And I'm just trying to get that messy middle and the ones who are starting to, you know, there is an opportunity to be like a McDonald's, but there's a lot that needs to be done from the get-go in terms of the decisions that are being made before agencies get briefs.
Yeah, gotcha. Charlene, you want to add to that?
Oh, just I completely agree. The room where it happens is actually before, like you said, it lands on the desk of the creatives. And, you know, to your earlier points, if that room is still thinking about it in a legacy way, and if that room's even lived experience doesn't have exposure to the realities of, you know, what our kids are doing, what we're doing, how our communities are, changes that are happening, conversations that are happening, then you will either see or not see value in places where maybe it hasn't been before. But if you're looking long-term at your strategy for opportunities, that room has to be thinking about these populations and experiences differently.
Yeah. I want to stay with you, Charlene, and move to data and analytics.
Oh, sure.
So when you think about data and analytics in this conversation, in what ways can data and analytics be leveraged to better understand and connect with the multiracial consumer in advertising campaigns specifically?
Yeah, one of my favorite things to do with data is to myth bust or course correct. One of the favorite examples I'm using right now, after the release of Cowboy Carter and reclaiming the space of that genre in the African American experience, is, did you know that country music as a radio format is consistently a top 10 radio format for Black listeners? Where folks feel
I
like—
did not know that.
Yes.
Well, according to Nielsen audio measurements, this is consistently a top format for Black listeners, for Hispanic listeners. And so again, our marketing opportunities aligned with, maybe you're not, and oh, by the way, a top 10 format that has more listeners than, say, gospel or jazz as a format on the radio, among Black listeners specifically. And so while you have this cultural moment saying, here's all this new, all this new interest, right, in the format, but there's an opportunity to really speak specifically to someone there and bring other folks along if it's done really right. So I love using data to show new opportunities and to like uncover maybe where, oh, my gut says this, your gut's wrong. The way we've always done it, that's wrong. So trying to like build that path forward, I feel like data helps us really line the path. And so one of the most exciting things about, again, the report that we released in February, go to nielsen.com/Black America to download it. But I really do think that specifically when it comes to the Black experience in particular in this country, there are so many different things moving under our feet. 1 out of 5 Black Americans today is either an immigrant or the child of an immigrant already today. The African-born population has tripled in size in the last 20 years. It's on par with our Caribbean population now in the States. So if you're just thinking about an African-American experience, if you're just thinking about an urban experience, you're not going far enough to sustain your relationship with Black consumers. That's going to be a growth problem, right? And so I love using data to just kind of show the way and to like get those biases out of the way. One, from a planning and an insights perspective, but also from a testing perspective, where we do see a lot of brands and agencies and marketers who feel like, oh, I know how to talk to them. And when we look at brand impact data and testing of those campaigns, the audience or the consumer base is telling us, No. So that's one of the things that really that I love about this opportunity is to provide data to help course correct and plan for the future.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Elizabeth?
I also like the fact, what I'm hearing you say also is that you're using data to also allow people to be curious.
Yes.
And that's something that I think that we've changed within our structure of McDonald's. We used to do a ton of research before we launched a product, before we sent creative out there in any which way and form. And what we learned over the past 5 years is that we had to be more nimble. We had to listen to the consumer. And so we started listening to our fans in a different way. Number one, we went out into the marketplace and we actually our agencies did road trips to where they went to in Idaho or a French Lick, Indiana, to just see how the consumer was behaving and what they were saying about McDonald's. And then we combined that with what we were hearing from a social media perspective. We would have never done that 30 years ago. Of course, because social media wasn't there, but we would have never done that. But previously, in terms of guiding the data or guiding the insight that we were getting from what we were seeing consumers do. And so once we did that, it allowed us to reshape the way understanding how our fans were engaging with us, and it allowed us to use a different sort of data to be curious and to then lead our campaigns. Our voice in social changed. We started saying things like there's a fan truth that we have in which the mom says, "You don't have McDonald's money." And people were like, "What does that mean?" We were able to bring that into the way that we talk in terms of you don't have McDonald's money, or now you have McDonald's money, or whatever it may be, in order to engage with the consumers in an authentic way. And then we combine that with the data to make sure that before we sent creative out or content out, that it did resonate, that we weren't overstepping, and that we were truly being authentic to the way the consumer felt. So I just feel like there's a way that you use it to be creative in the upfront and maybe non-traditional paths, and then you balance it off with some of the more traditional ways to engage our consumer.
And Mike, go ahead.
I was just going to throw in that one of my favorite millennial parent trends is that we do have McDonald's money.
That's right. We do
So
have
we
McDonald's
do
money.
have, we're like breaking a generational curse. We now have McDonald's money. So,
Mike, I want to, same question for you, just from your perspective
Yeah.
and how you work with your customers.
I think from the agency perspective, data is the foundation, right? In terms of building our strategies, when we build our audiences, they're based off of data. My biggest concern is, are we using the right data, right? Is the data representative of these communities? Are our teams who are building out these strategies, when they're defining their audiences, is it keeping diverse segments out of the opportunity, right? When you're defining who your audience is. So that has always been a big issue for me, is are we getting the data correct? I've heard so many times from various clients, hey, we tested the Hispanic market, or we tested the Black African American market, and our MMM results came in, it didn't work, and we're just gonna move on. And I'm like, wait, how are you gonna move on from like 40% of the population, right? There's something wrong with the MMM. Like, we gotta double click in terms of what data are we using in terms of accurately measuring these communities. I think, as we go into the upfronts, there's a lot of conversations happening with, Nielsen panel, plus big data, and how we already see the impacts in terms of diverse networks and platforms already having bigger scale than what it was before. So I think we need to start moving from legacy forms of thinking in terms of how we measure these audiences, because it has a real impact on the business, on the way we go to market, and how we actually, invest from a media perspective.
Yeah.
Yeah.
This is a very real conversation because we were doing some research for our next rollout around AA and HPI month, and there was some mention of like, oh, well, Asians don't watch news. I'm like, I don't know if that's what we want to say. So it was like, the engagement looks different, whereas from my community, the TV, is king, right? That culture is key, content is key to the culture. We will go and seek that out, especially in a TV format. But for this community, our data shows like the mobile screen is the primary screen. TV doesn't have the same kind of relationship or habit. And so it's those nuances in the data that can really help make or break a strategy. So I love that you're bringing that to the table, because if you're looking in all the wrong places, you will definitely continue to get those results. And so it takes that intention and having the right folks involved for sure.
And also, like the data points, you mentioned the Dorado campaign from McDonald's, right? Like if you look at data from a Hollywood perspective, the underrepresentation of Hispanics, right? They drive 25%, almost 30% of the box office. And if you look at particular weekends, I think for a movie like Barbie, it was 40% of that opening weekend came from the Hispanic community. If you look at representation, less than 5% of roles and less than 5% of directors, producers are Latino, and McDonald's actually built out an entire initiative to flip the script on that. So I applaud those types of initiatives because you're looking at the data points, you're looking at the gaps, and saying what can we do different here.
Yeah, and that's a good setup for my next question, because we've talked a lot about the challenges. We've given some examples of solutions, right? But as we move forward, I want to get a sense from all of you. Mike, I'll start with you of just how do you see advertising evolving over the next few years to better cater to the multiracial consumer?
Look, I think, unfortunately, post George Floyd, I was very worried that this conversation was going to be like 1 year and then it would drop off a cliff. And to know that 4 years now, we're still having this conversation and we're keeping up the momentum has been amazing. So I applaud, I give flowers, Kerel, to you and to Group Black for giving us the stage to actually have this conversation, because we can't be speaking to ourselves in specific conferences. We need to be speaking in bigger stages to bigger audiences and cast a wider net so that more marketers kind of say, you know what, there's an opportunity for us to do something here. So I think that has been amazing. That did not exist before. So we're having the conversation. The investment is increasing. So from an Omnicom Media Group perspective, we've increased our spend in a diverse media space plus 10% year over year, in a year where overall media investment was -2, right? So that's a huge indicator that there's something here and that marketers are still find value and they know there's growth opportunity in this space. I just think it takes a village, right? So the more we're having these conversations, the consistency of not just having them during Black History Month and during Hispanic Heritage Month is crucial. Because there's, I always say it's the twin economic engines of population growth and buying power. It's sitting right here, right? So like you can't ignore the fact that these audiences really are the future of your consumer base.
Elizabeth?
Yeah, so I really see a change in the way marketing is defined and who is a typical marketer. The way that I have seen it is that at McDonald's, we have seen our African American, Hispanic American, and Asian American drive the growth within our digital environment. So whether it's our loyalty app, whether it is our delivery, whether it is our mobile app, we've just seen that growth. And knowing that, that's going to take a different marketing skill in terms of reaching that consumer, and knowing that the multicultural consumer is going there on digital, it means that we've got to get better at doing that. We've got to get in the front part of it in terms of understanding what the digital applications are. We have to do a better job of understanding how to engage people within those digital platforms, when they want to be engaged and how they want to be engaged, which is going to shift the way the industry goes to market. And I think we're seeing it also in the way that influencers are starting to rise. I have never, I was a kid who would look at the little book for Christmas and would circle the things that I wanted and give that to my mom and be like, can you buy this for me for Christmas? But now what I'm seeing is that influencers are on Amazon. And these influencers, it's not the designer of Chanel, et cetera. It is an influencer who is actually on Amazon using a digital platform to say, this is what my culture means to me. This is how I want to be seen, and selling those products to other individuals. So things like that are really going to shape the way that we engage with the consumers, but it's also going to shape the way the people who are developing that content are moving forward, and we just have to be ready for it.
It's the only time my 7-year-old pays attention to advertising, when it's her birthday or Christmas.
Does she do it? You gotta get her something.
Charlene, take question.
I will just add, because +1 to everything that our experts have laid out, but from an audience perspective, I'm really excited about the opportunity of the next generation of this industry and going to, connecting consumers with brands. Because again, if you are not leading with that lens of inclusion and diversity, you will continue to miss the mark. And I love a case study. We have a great one this week with the viewership and engagement to the WNBA draft, right? If you haven't seen, per Nielsen data, 2.45 million viewers, right? Tuning in, historic numbers to their draft class. And yes, the fashion, yes, the talent, all that, but also the representation of that class is truly phenomenal, and bringing people into the game and into the W who maybe didn't have an interest before, but see somebody who's representing indigenous culture, or somebody who's representing, you know, for the rural girlies, like making it, you know, I think that there are so many different examples, and we're about to see a really huge shift, specifically with this class of talent in WNBA, with the Olympics. I mean, the sponsorships are just writing themselves, and they have a class of talent that can really lead from an inclusive, intersectional place. I think we're going to continue, or I hope is that we continue to see more of that.
I think so. I think ticket sales are already up.
Ooh, child. I tried to get Mystics versus Sky. They were $500. So resale attacked yet again. But yeah, it's crazy.
Yeah, definitely. Final question for each of you. We have a bunch of marketers in the room here today. This has been great conversation, again, talking about the challenges, the opportunities ahead, how to solve for some of those challenges. There's one piece of advice that you can give to everyone in this room that when they leave Miami, go back to their office, a change that they can make. What would that be? Elizabeth, I'll start with you.
Oh, wow. And it's pretty much the same advice that I give to everyone who asks me, you know, Liz, what would you do differently? I would say, number one, speak up now, speak up more. And I look at something that Barack Obama used to say during his campaign, which is one voice can change a room. And right now, each one of you are sitting at a place where you have that voice where you can change the room. Whether it is about how you're seeking curiosity and asking questions, whether it's about how you're bringing yourself forward so that people will see you. Use this moment now to change the room. Yes. And that's what I would say. Go back and use this moment now to change the room.
Mike?
Actually, that's perfect, because I'm gonna build on that, because I think in a lot of these rooms, diversity is important, right? Diversity of thought is important, but the expertise in this marketplace is critical. I think I've seen it too many times where there's gaps in terms of understanding those nuances and insights. And although diversity is great, diversity doesn't always equate to expertise, right? So I think that is something that we need to kind of acknowledge, because there's been a lot of mishaps in terms of, you know, truly understanding, like, what are the nuances in the Hispanic community or within the Afro-Latino community? And if you don't have the experts who could actually address that, then you are building off of those biases that's this vicious cycle. So just understanding when to bring in the experts, and actually let the experts have the option of saying, when do I need to be part of that meeting? Like, have them, you know, be part of all of these discussions where the big decisions are being made, right? Because that's where the magic happens.
Yeah, and I perfectly said to both of you, and I'll add that in addition to having the right folks doing the work on your side of the house, obviously, like I said, lean into your experts. We have a ton of data that can help you figure out what that path looks like. So in addition to the messages that you're creating, one thing we haven't talked a lot about that also is equally as important is the content that you partner with, or the spaces that you show up with, to carry that message. And there's almost like, I think you mentioned the halo effect of how and where you show up. And in that corner of the culture can also be super powerful. So if you don't have people in the room with the right lived experience, definitely reach out to those experts who can help guide you through it. And it's a 1-2 punch of having the right message and showing up in the right places, because your future consumer is identifying in new and different ways that our industry legacy practices haven't always reached. So very exciting times ahead.
Yep. Well, I want to thank each of you for joining me today, sharing your thoughts and your insights. Great conversation. Really appreciate it. Let's give it up for them.
Thank you.
And then just a couple of quick announcements before everyone heads out. Please be sure to come back to the Group Black area today. We've got a bunch of great content lined up starting at 1:30. We have a conversation around a new product launch called She's Good. which is focused on Black maternal health. That's at 1:30. Then at 2:30, conversation around the next gen of consumers. And then at 3:30, the next gen of creative. And one thing to remember about the Group Black space, we are the only space here at Possible where you do not need a badge to get in. So bring a friend and come on back and have some great conversations for the rest of the day. Thank you.